Okay, great. We're live. So, good evening, everyone. Tonight we have with us a very distinguished alumnus, Dr. Arfa Karani. As always, please feel free to send in any questions you may have, and we'll pose them to the guest at the end. Arfa, before we begin, it would be great if you could introduce yourself briefly.
Sure. So I'm Arfa. I'm currently based in London. I am from a very small village, which was known for its highest suicide rate at some point, and that's where I started. Before TISB, I was in another boarding school in Uti, and then I went to TISB for a couple years, and from then I've been in London. What I've studied physics for my master's and PhD. I'm really passionate about renewable energy. So my PhD was about trying to make solar cells more efficient. And I decided to go from there into energy industry so that I could actually bring some technologies from the lab to the industry, so that all the great research that we have being developed by scientists in the lab doesn't stay there, but gets a chance to make it into people's lives. So that's me.
Okay, it's great to have you with us. So first, start by asking you some questions about college life. So, why
Sure.
did you personally choose your college? Like, what appealed to you?
So to be very honest, I filled up the UCAS form with 5 top colleges that were giving physics courses. So I did at the time go in for Oxbridge interview as well. I came down to Cambridge for an interview, but I didn't pass that. And then it was Imperial, UCL, Warwick, I think Birmingham as well on that list. So it wasn't that I picked UCL. I just picked the universities that were giving physics as a course. And then turned out that UCL was one of the universities where, a lot of people who did physics did end up either doing a master's or ended up doing PhDs after. So that's probably why I decided to go that way. And I guess the other factor was that my dad was very insistent that I lived in a big city. And that was just because I came from a very small town, and he believed that living in a big city would give me more exposure, will show me what life is in real world. So while I was doing my degree, he wanted me to pick up some life skills by living in a bigger city than I was used to living in. So I think that combination of those things sort of made me pick UCL.
That's great. That's great. So, a lot of us are worried about going to college because it seems like this whole daunting prospect in our head. So, what was your expectation or idea of college before you actually went in? And how significantly did the reality differ from your idea of college life?
Right. So I think for me, because like I said, I've been living in boarding school before I went to London, and before that I was in a very small village. So I really didn't have experience of living in a big city. Although Bangalore is relatively, it is a large city, but we were all in boarding school, right? And I was a full-time boarder, so I never actually lived in a big city. So for me, it was more exciting than daunting. Honestly, I was really looking forward to the freedom to be out there and be able to plan my day according to what I wanted to do. And I think more importantly, it was the idea of not having to study so many subjects like we did in IB. And for all of you guys, let me tell you, your IB years, your 11th and 12th, when you're doing college applications, you're doing your extended essay, you're doing your SATs, you're doing your ACT, you're preparing for your IB exams, and I don't know what else you're doing, but those 2 years are really, really the toughest years for us as students, and then going forward as well. So if you really manage to discipline yourself in those years and make the most out of all the opportunities that you have and give your best to everything you're doing, then life is much easier afterwards. So there's no need to worry about how daunting the experience is going to be. At least that's how I've seen it. And yeah, going to London was exciting, but at the same time, it was something I'd never done before. And I'm the kind of person, when I'm put in a situation where I don't know much about what the environment is going to be like, I get a bit anxious, but also that really motivates me to go and get over that fear. So so yeah, it was a mixed feeling, I would say. And you asked how the reality differed from what my expectations were. Well, I didn't really. Honestly, it's been a while. It's been 8 years, so I don't really remember what I felt like. But I think it was, you know, the fear or the high expectations from me at the time, or from all of us, right? When you're going away, there's been so much investment from your parents, emotional, mental, physical, financial, that has gone into putting you in a place where you can afford university education, and that too abroad. There's a lot of expectation out of you. So for me, it was, I think, what I was thinking at the time mostly was, how is the academic life going to be? Am I going to meet friends and people that I get along with? What all kinds of different things. But I think once you get there, the reality is different. At least for me, it was different from expectation in that it wasn't as difficult as I thought it would be. It was fairly easy, and having done IB, I think was a good advantage. I did PCM for my HL. And so the mathematics courses and the physics courses were pretty simple for the first couple years. And that's what I mean by, when you do IB, you're really prepared for the worst. So when you're out there and you're doing courses that you like, I think it becomes much easier in some sense.
So that's great to know that our IB education is actually preparing us for college properly. So you mentioned that a lot of students are apprehensive about, like living in London, and it's such a big city. So, so how would you say that student life is like in London, or specifically your college? What activities do students participate in to unwind? Are student clubs like a big part? So basically any primer on social life.
Definitely. So at first, I'd like to take the blame for being a big nerd. I was very, focused on my studies and giving most times to sitting in the library and doing my coursework and, trying to be on top of everything. So I was a bit on that side, unfortunately. But towards my second year, I started getting into dancing, and this was because of some societies that I joined. And this was, it wasn't something I actively went and pursued. It was my classmates and people I was attending courses with who were going to these clubs and societies, and I joined in with them. And since then, I started dancing, and leading dance teams and things like that. So it sort of comes as a part and parcel of what you do at a university. You will usually meet, everyone you meet has something that they're doing on the side. So even if you don't know where exactly you want to go or what you would enjoy, there's a platter of things. So you have these freshers open days when you go in. So first week or so, or at least 2 or 3 days, you have when you can go, and it's an open day, so there are stalls and there are societies and clubs lining up and telling you about what they do, what they are, and almost everyone now has a website. So you collect all the goodies they have to give you and the brochures, and you can go and find out later which of these clubs and societies you like, and you usually end up going there with your coursework mates. At least that's how people around me found the clubs and activities that they wanted to do. And I'd like to say that, there is a big, at least in London, there was a big drinking culture. So if you weren't going, and I didn't drink, if you weren't going to the clubs and the pubs, you felt like you were missing out, because after 5-6 p.m., that is what people do. And it's a part of the culture here. This is how people here, get to know each other and spend time together doing nothing. You're just sitting across the table with people and chatting, essentially. But if you don't go to pubs and clubs, then you're missing out on that experience. And I felt like in my first year, I really missed out on hanging out with people because I wasn't comfortable going to pubs and clubs. But eventually, I figured that there was a bunch of people who weren't engaging in the drinking culture as much, and there was a whole different side to people who did all kinds of sports. So Wednesdays, usually you have classes only in the morning. The afternoons are off. So Wednesday afternoon, people usually used to go out and do club activities, and also on the weekend. So I started doing that, and then, you know, from there you start meeting like-minded people and people that enjoy doing similar things to what you like doing. So social life, I think it just comes as a part of you being a student at a university. There are so many different opportunities. There are all kinds of, there was kickboxing, there was, I don't know, I can't even start to list. There were so many different clubs and activities that are sort of thrown at you, and that's, you don't have any classes or anything else to do in the first few days. So you start your college life with trying to find like-minded people. So it's usually well facilitated within the universities and colleges.
Perfect. I think it's quite relieving to hear that there are so many avenues for exploration. So a lot of what you mentioned also has to do with student culture. So what is the student culture like at your college, or what was it like? And were the students competitive, or was there generally more focus on collaboration?
Definitely the latter. I think so. Student culture, it's you know, like at least these days, I've been talking a lot about how every individual has you know, their own personality, and as a result they have their own hobbies and they have their own things that they like to do and they like to spend their free time doing. So with that, there is no one culture to the entire student body, right? There's going to be different group of people, and there's going to be different sort of motivation that these groups have because of the kind of people they are, and you know, the kind of things that they like doing. So I won't generalize to say that, you know, all people were like this or all people were like that. I think for me, I found my group of people when, and this was just the same as what happened to me in boarding schools, right? I joined quite late. I joined my first boarding school in 9th grade when, you know, when it's very difficult to make friends because almost everyone has their own groups. At UCL, I think that was an easier experience because everyone is fresh and new, and usually people don't come there with their friends. So when you go there and you have this Freshers Week, you're really meeting people that they're going to take same courses as you, and are from all different backgrounds and cities and countries and places they've lived. So you will definitely find a few people that are like you. So let's say that there is no wholesome culture. I forget your second question.
My second question was basically just like, are the students competitive, or is there generally more focus on collaboration?
Definitely collaboration, yeah. So so there are these things. So you have unit tests or kind of class tests that happen every 2 or 3 weeks, at least in the UK. And to be able to solve those, because you know, it's a new format of learning, and to be able to crack those tests, you usually get to work with groups of people. You either, you know, you have group projects where you're working in groups of 2 or 3. And even when you have individual worksheets, it's always beneficial to work together with other people. Now, as I said, IB does prepare you really well. At least for me, that's what I felt, for physics and math at least. And so when I was there, for me, the group activity aspect of it came because I was able to be there and help my friends and colleagues who'd done A levels and different kinds of, you know, different education for their math course, especially. I was able to spend time with them and teach math to them the way I'd learned it, right? So we were usually there to exchange our experiences and the way we understood concepts. So yeah, your studying is very it's mutual learning. It's something you end up enjoy doing because it's not a boarding school, or it's not a school where, you know, you will go in and you will have a day full of classes and then you go back home. It's usually you have a few classes in a day, maybe 3 or 4. And between those classes, you have plenty of time, and you will have tutorials, and you will have other places where you actively have to solve problems, and you actively have to do some work. But usually it's lectures that you go to, and lectures, if you're sitting in one room for 2 hours or more, it becomes very difficult to concentrate, right? And so you're taking down notes, but not all of it is processing for you at the same time. So you end up sitting down with your friends later on to share your notes and to figure out, what was it that we missed out, or what was it that we didn't understand as a collective, and then try to figure it out. So it's very, very collaborative, and it's not only within your year, it's also with your seniors, because they've gone through that year, they've done those courses, so they are in a better position to sort of guide you, and you end up meeting people across all years.
So I think that's very, very positive to hear. So for a lot of us, education in the UK is associated with like a high level of academic rigor. So a question that has been asked often was, how are the mental health facilities at your college, and are many students unable to cope with the pressure that studying, especially studying physics, brings?
That's a very good question, and I'm really glad that you asked that. So every student has a personal tutor at university. Well, at least at UCL you did. Or you have, like, for a department, there is a council that sits there that you can go to and speak to, and you have a sort of coordinator for your course that is managing all the courses, and that is seeing how the class performs as a whole. What are students struggling with? What are the courses that the teachers haven't been as effective, and hence the students haven't been able to score well in their exams, or aren't understanding the concepts, and hence there are requests for more and more tutorials. So there are usually these. So first place to go is your personal tutor. Nowadays, I think they also assign buddies to you, which are basically students in 3rd or 4th year of their degree. So they've already been through it. They are now well settled, and they're in a good place to help freshers get on board and tackle the life experience of being in a university. So mental health is at the center of all of these universities and departments in the UK, starting in the past few years, right? So not necessarily when I joined. When I joined, it was more, you did have a mentor and a tutor and all of those people you could go to, but they weren't actively reaching out to you to check up on you as frequently as they do now. So now I hear that monthly and weekly you have these focus groups where you can go and meet people, and if you're struggling with any aspect of being a student, there are places for you. You will know, and there are clubs and societies as well. I began and that we discussed earlier, right, where you just go to chat to people and you meet new people, and as when we are 18, 19-year-olds, it's difficult to go approach people and make friends. At least that's how I was. I was a bit shy as well. So for me, it wasn't always natural to go and find people. For me, it really helped me when the department organized something that all of us had to go to, or if it was optional, and people who really felt like they were having difficulties in making friends, they could go there. So they are facilitating, I don't know how to say it, but groups or focus groups, more like, and areas where it's much easier for you to approach people, or they will approach you regularly and ask you about how you're doing, and what is it that has been bothering you, if anything. So it is at the center of attention, and I would say it's actually more important than your academics and the way you perform. It's most important that mentally you are you're not feeling left out, or you're not feeling low, and you're not feeling like it's too difficult, because as soon as you start having those feelings, everything becomes a lot more difficult than it actually is. So yeah, definitely, there will be many points of contact for you to deal with that aspect.
Those are some very valuable insights, and it's great to see that UCL at least has taken such correct steps to, promote and support mental health. So, you mentioned going to lectures earlier as being a major part of the work you do and the study you have. So, specific to you, how many hours of lectures and homework did you have per week? And was the workload manageable? And what tips do you have for us to keep up with the academic work, if any?
So I don't remember exactly the number of hours. I would say we had like 4 to 6 hours of lectures every day and an hour of tutorial 2 or 3 times a week. So it wasn't very busy, but like I mentioned earlier, for me, a good way of coping with all that lectures, because you need to remember, right, that these are different courses. So you've for physics, for example, I did a mathematics course for 2 hours in the morning, and in the afternoon I was in a thermodynamics course, and in the later in the afternoon or early evening I was doing atomic physics. So when you're jumping, I know it sounds a bit stupid, because when you're doing your IB, you're going from math to economics to Hindi to English or French or whatever languages and subjects you're doing. But in university, it's a bit different, because you're spending 2 hours just understanding some concepts, core concepts, right? And by the end of the day, and I would say actually by the end of the first lecture and the first 2 hours of your day, you start losing brain power to focus on what's being taught to you, right? So you're still being able to take down notes, and you're still being able to sort of take in whatever the lecturer is throwing at you, but you sort of lose the ability to process it. So for me, the best thing to do in that scenario was to sort of, after the day has gone, you go back and you look at your notes and you sort of figure out the concepts that you didn't really understand, and pick those up and go and speak either to your tutor or the lecturer. You are always welcome to email the lecturers after the lecture. So if there are concepts and theories that didn't agree well with you and you didn't want to ask the question in class because you were in class of 100 200 people, then you can always write an email to the lecturer, and they're quite good at responding to those, right? Because it's very likely that many students have had the same questions as you've had, and no one wanted to ask. So you usually, I think just going back to class notes, and if you've missed out on notes, then figuring out, and you have these. The tests that I mentioned, you have biweekly and weekly tests, and sometimes monthly tests, where you really won't be able to answer any of those questions that are put out in those tests if you haven't understood some concepts. So for me, it's always the learning came from understanding the theories and concepts rather than practicing previous exam papers or questions and so on. So every time I didn't know where to start, I knew that I didn't understand the theory. So those tests were actually a good point for me to go back and understand where the gap in my understanding was, and figure it out. Either work with your friends, and I'm sure once you are in those groups, you have support from your seniors. That's the most important one, who are much more approachable than a lecturer, and they will sit down with you and they will really help you through the topics and through the questions if you find particular tests difficult, because they've been through the same thing, and they're still using that information and knowledge for their ongoing studies. So they are the things are really fresh in their mind, and hence they're in a very good place to help you. So the only advice, if I were to give one, would be ask questions. Don't hold yourself back, and don't think that because you didn't understand something you will never understand it, or it's too difficult, or any of that. Just go and ask questions, no matter how stupid you think they are, but they are not stupid. No questions are stupid.
So I think that's some advice we need to hear repeatedly to, truly figure out how important it is. So I think a lot of it also depends on the style of learning a person has. So would you say that your education, like in physics, was mostly theoretical, or were there a lot of hands-on opportunities to take advantage of?
Sorry, I lost you there a bit. Could you repeat your question, please?
So would you say that the education that you went through, was it mostly theoretical, or were there a lot of hands-on opportunities to take advantage of?
No, definitely hands-on. So this really reminds me of the computing courses that we did, right? So it's everything that you're learning in class, it's usually aligned with your lab work. So as a physics student, for me, I used to have 3 or 4 hours of lab work every week. And on top of lab work, I used to have computing labs as well. So it's not theory. It's very little of it is concept understanding, and I mean the lectures are obviously there for you to understand the concept, but then immediately that week you will go to the lab and you will apply some of the concepts that you've learned. So yes, it's been very hands-on. The courses are designed quite well, but that's also then after finishing my undergrad, when I was doing my PhD, I was on the other side of the table, and I was sort of coaching and tutoring the first years and second year undergrads as a PhD student. And that's when I learned that all of these courses that we do are every year evaluated and reevaluated and improved. So things based on the feedback that you give as a first year student, and there are lots of feedbacks and surveys that they carry out. Based on that feedback, they try to improve the courses every other year. So now if the university is a good university and the department really cares about their reputation, so to say, they will improve the course every year. So the course that I did was now 8 years ago, so it's probably very different today compared to what I did. But yes, it's very hands-on, definitely hands-on.
So that's good to know. So you're very inclined into research, as we've come to know. So how did you find research opportunities in physics? So did you approach your professors? Was it through some external source?
Good question. So it was through my master's degree. So I did a 4 years MSci course. And in the 4th year, in your master's course, you have to do a full-time project. It's a full-fledged research project that you do for a year, and at the end of the year, you write a thesis. That's your master's thesis. And the way you pick a topic for research is that all the professors that teach in the department and close by departments, they make a list of projects that they want the master students to do. And from that list of projects, you pick a project that appeals to you the most, or you pick a few, and then you go and approach the professors who've set those projects out. And once you've spoken to the professors and they're happy with, why you're interested in doing a project, and you're happy with them, and you feel like you can work with them, then you pick those subjects. So for me, it was my master's project when I actually first time went into a lab to do an experiment that wasn't designed before. Now I'm not sure how much sense this makes. And I began, please interrupt me if I'm becoming too technical. But when I say designed experiment, it's an experiment of which you know an answer to. For example, you go into a physics lab to measure a height of a building that you already know, for example, or you go in to measure the value of acceleration due to gravity, so the constant g. So all these answers you already know, right? So when you're doing an experiment, you're learning how to do an experiment to come to that conclusion and to find that value. Now that is a designed experiment that you will do in the first 3 years of your undergrad. But in your master's, you have to come up with a proposal on how you will design a project, what will the conclusion of that project be, and why is that conclusion important. So when you start to think about doing science that way, the biggest problem is finding the right problem to solve. And that's when you start learning what real life research, so to say, is. And that's what I learned during my master's. And that was the first time I went into the lab to start making organic solar cells. So organic meaning that you make them from polymers and plastics. So these are hydrocarbon compounds that you can paint on surfaces. And with that plastic, you can actually make a solar cell. And that's what really intrigued me. These were plastic-made solar cells. And, I got into the lab, and then the PhD students from those labs, they taught me how to make a device, what the lab worked like. And I learned a lot of chemistry, actually, during my master's course and also during my PhD. So you start getting these opportunities. The more and more you get into it, the more and more you get interested in it, because there are lots of professors out there who need a helping hand. Because the way it works is a professor, as a group leader, can always have as many students and as many PhD students and as many postdocs and so on they can get to do the research that they really want to do. So as a master's student and also as a PhD student, if you're interested to do some particular kind of research, the first place to go is professors who are working in that field, and they will always guide you to the right groups or the right project leaders who will have projects for you to go and contribute to. And I think it also helps to have a mentality where you set yourself up for learning rather than, wanting to give. You're more in wanting to take and wanting to learn kind of phase of mind. And once you are in that phase and you go and approach people, they'll be very happy to give and to teach you from their experiences. So I think there are plenty of opportunities if you really want to do research. And so it helps to speak to your professors and teachers in the department.
That's good to know. That's definitely advice we'll keep in mind. So would you say, like developing further, would you say that your education in college, like your MSCI, provided you with the skills you required to go for your PhD, or like basically to work in the industry or academia?
Yes, so it was my master's project that made me realize that I actually really enjoyed doing research, because before master's I didn't do any independent research, right? I was doing projects which were already pre-designed, or I was doing projects that were very tiny, a few weeks, maybe a month, or maybe 3 months at most. I think one of the questions that I was finding difficult to answer was it the experimental research that I enjoyed doing, which was in the lab? So going out there and making these solar cells and so on, or was it, theoretical research? So trying to understand things that we don't understand yet. So between my third and fourth year, I sort of did an internship with a professor, which was a theoretical project for 2 months. So it was a summer research internship. And that was very theory based, and I was doing simulations and computing and coding. So I realized that I don't really enjoy, things that I cannot touch and feel and make happen. And I really liked being in the lab where I was spending hours and not realizing where the day has gone by. So I sort of did that kind of test experiment for myself to figure out where in research I wanted to go. And so my master's project was really, we were trying to answer some questions through my master's project for how to make these devices more efficient. And at the end of it, the PhD that I was working with, I was a bit unsure of applying for PhDs because I didn't think I was good enough to get in anywhere. And it was my friends and it was my mentor and PhD students who were training me for my master's work, who sort of encouraged me to just put in an application, right? They said, if you want to do a PhD and you really enjoy the work, then write an application. The worst thing that'll happen is you won't get accepted. But if you don't apply, you will definitely not get accepted, right? So I just went ahead and put in applications, and yeah, I think it was because of that atmosphere. It was because of those people. It was because of the project that I was doing that I decided to go into PhD. And when I was doing my PhD for the 4 years, so it's 3.5 to 4 years, and I think very early on, so end of second year, early third year, I started thinking about what I wanted to do next. And it just didn't feel right to me that we were doing so much in-depth research on this particular subject and no one in the industry. So people who are actually making these solar cells out in the industry didn't know, or they were vaguely aware of the kind of research that was going on in the labs, right? So people who are actually using these devices out in India or out in China or out in sub-Saharan Africa, where there is plenty of sunlight, didn't really know what was going on in the labs. And that's why I felt like, I want to be able to bridge that gap between academia and industry. So that was sort of my inspiration, and working during my PhD, I was involved in various clubs and societies again, where we were interacting a lot with the industry, right? So it is always, you learn every, so my dad says this often, that every step you climb, you can see ahead much clearer. So when you're at the end of a particular journey, you will be able to see the whatever lies ahead much clearer. So you shouldn't go into your university making plans of what your future is going to be like. Yes, you should have an idea of what you would like to do, what what is out there for you to do, but don't go in with a closed and narrow mind saying this is what I want to do and this is what I want to be and this is how I'm going to do it. Be open to opportunities, go and try different things out, explore a bit, meet as many people as you can and speak to them, understand what their journeys have been like, understand what their aspirations are. And it's usually that kind of communication with people around you, going to various events. And that's another thing about these universities. You always have evening events and programs that you can go and attend, regardless of if they are in your course, in your department, or outside. And I think those places really help you look outside of your zone and figure out what else is out there for you to pick from. And I think that really, really helped me.
So thank you for this very important and very insightful perspective on this whole situation. So before we move into the audience questions, just one last question. As a PhD student, did you find enough time to pursue personal interests that could hypothetically be completely unrelated to your area of study?
Yeah, definitely. So I performed at this West End theater. So I don't know how many of you know the Mamma Mia show that happens in London in theaters. So we booked out one day of the theater in which these guys perform and put up a show. And we sold out tickets for 1,000 seats. It was a 3-hour show. And this is something that a society at UCL does regularly. They do it every year. And that year I was part of that society. We organized that, planned that, and I led a dance team of 22 people, and we sort of did an 8-minute dance performance on that stage where Mamma Mia usually performs. And that was all during my course, right? And it was a hectic schedule for me, and I used to live quite far away from the campus, so I used to walk in and out 40 minutes each every day. And despite of that, I had such an enthused group of people, I would say, that I was lucky enough to find and choreograph. And then I choreographed a couple of dances. We also participated in a dance competition that was international, that was led by Imperial. And there were universities from all across UK who participated in that. So like I said, when you figure out the things that you enjoy doing, and when you're not doing it for show or for pleasing someone else, or because you have to put it on your CV, or because of any other reason, but purely because you enjoy being in that atmosphere, then everything becomes possible, right? Because I was in my 4th year when I did all of this. Most of the final performances of my dancing happened in 3rd or 4th year, and I was really bogged down by the academic work. But I knew that I needed to find that the other side where things were not so serious, and I could just go and have fun and still be productive, in the sense that I was learning new dance techniques. I learned a lot of different dancing styles from people who were engaged in those performances with me. So yeah, I think trying to find things that make you happy and that you really enjoy doing it really gives you lot more possibilities than you would get otherwise. If you were just going around with pen and paper checking boxes, then it's a bit difficult.
That was great to hear. Definitely, definitely. So now moving into the audience questions, we have someone asking, what were your extracurriculars like? And as a recommendation, what physics related activities could people do outside the classroom?
Uh, so extracurriculars for me, I used to go to learn basketball in my early years, but I dropped that later on because there were too many other things to do. Dancing was one of the other extracurriculars for me, but usually your extracurriculars are the clubs and societies that you're part of, right? What was the second part of the question?
What physics related activities could people do outside the classroom other than online courses?
You could so there's this thing about open days and I forget what it's called, but you engage with society. So there are weekends where a group of people organize science festivals for young children, where you could go and set up a stall or be a part of someone else's stall where you know you have young children coming in, and you have science days and open days that university organizes, where you can go and again set up a stall or teach a particular concept or engage with really young children to tell them why science is cool. And I think there's a lot of science that I learned doing those activities. So definitely recommend it. If you're going to go out there to do any science, there will be plenty of opportunity to engage with public, engage with young kids, engage with people who are, you know, starting to pick their subjects to do whatever they want to do ahead. And it's always a learning experience when you go out there and you're trying to explain a particular concept. For example, why does a prism break out white light into colorful lights? Right? I think that was the concept that when I understood it, it really blew my mind, and that's probably why I ended up doing physics. So when you're at university, you'll get many opportunities to go out there and engage with young kids and talk to them about how cool science is.
That's great. That's great. So I'm not sure how much the next question is valid to you as a PhD student. So how did you choose your college at Cambridge? Like, is there such a concept for PhD students as well?
Yes. Yes, there is. And I didn't pick a college. Like I said, I wasn't sure if I was going to get a PhD position at all. So I just put in my application and I didn't pick a college. But if I had a second go at, if I had a chance to have a second go at it, I would pick colleges that are known for a particular subject or are closer to department. I know most of my colleagues who picked colleges in their application picked a college that was close to their labs, so that it's convenient for them to go back and forth from there. So if you're picking colleges, I think it's better if they're close to your department in Cambridge. But I mean, these are also some of the first world problems, I'd call them, right? Like if you're going to Cambridge and you get to be in any of those colleges, there is no real discrimination between, you know, which college you come from. You usually end up meeting with people in your department more than that at your college. I guess people who've been in different colleges have different experience, but at least my experience was that it really didn't matter what college I was in.
Understood, understood. So we have someone asking, how does physics differ in university in relation to high school physics? So maybe you can talk about this in terms of the rigor or the time commitment you need to give.
So how does physics differ from, so first thing, I guess there's a lot more to any particular science subjects than you know when you are in high school or pre-university. It differs in the sense that you figure out how deep every chapter that you studied at school was. So for example, for me, physics was like I said, it was, you know, why does rainbow appear, or why does light shine a particular way, why does it slow down in a particular material, and why does it speed up in others. It were concepts like that. But when I came to university, physics was, you know, a lot more about finding out how nature works. I don't want to sound too philosophical, but I think it's you learn about. I didn't know that statistical thermodynamics was different from thermodynamics, for example. Now, my friends and my colleagues at the during PhD would probably think differently, but for me, all of these things, we spent hours and hours learning about molecular and atomic physics in fourth year, when we'd done molecular physics and atomic physics separately in third year. And all of this stuff, like these sound like just words and phrases at the moment or when you start, right? When you start, you don't know what does it mean to do a physics degree. But there's a lot of math that you learn. There is a lot of computing and coding that you learn, and through your years, in first year, you sort of get a general overview of all different parts of physics, including astrophysics, computational physics, atomic physics, molecular physics, cold atom physics. You know, you get a flavor of all different kind of courses that you can do in your first year, and second year onwards, you get a lot of options, so you can pick and choose what subjects you want to do. And third year, it becomes even more, so you have even more options. And finally, in your master's year, you're doing a project on a subject or topic, or a module or an area that you really enjoy studying. So yeah, I think it becomes a lot more real, and you know, either you enjoy it or you don't. And I think the most important thing is that you're true to yourself about if you're really liking it, and if it is what you wanted to do. And if it is not, then you should take action immediately, right? Like, for example, my sister, she's younger than me, but she's been a big inspiration to me. She started off doing economics, I think, at university, and then she decided to do mathematics because she enjoyed those courses. She enjoyed mathematics a lot more than she did economics, and she ended up doing a double major. But the point is that at university, you do have, especially in the US, you do have an option of picking different majors and spinning out and doing different things. So once you go into university and you feel like what you came here for is not what you're getting, then take an action, speak to your tutor, and you know, they'll always be able to figure out a way, instead of you trying to push through just because you've made a choice and you must stick with it. So yeah, that was my experience.
So that's quite interesting to hear. So we have Ria Mantri asking, can university be considered to be easier than the IB?
I would say the first year, yes, and the second year, maybe. Depends on how well you concentrated in your IB, but the third year onwards, no. I think second year onwards, it starts to get a bit tough because you're learning new things, right? You're learning things that you didn't hear about before, and you're learning things that are building up on your previous knowledge. So it depends on how strong your foundation is, and if it's been built the way it should have, then third year and fourth year, it's easier to grasp topics because they're usually building up on your knowledge from your first year, from your IB, and from your second year as well. But yeah, it's first year, I think, is fairly easy. At least that's what I felt.
So that's definitely good to know. So for the next question, we have someone asking, when you mentioned that there are classes of 100 and 200 people, are the colleges able to focus on every student personally? If
Not
yes,
at all.
how well are they able to do that?
No, so well, that's an interesting question, right? Because it depends on how active and proactive you are at reaching out to your tutors. So the tutors that you're assigned are usually either professors or assistants or lecturers from the physics department, right? So and the lecturers who is giving you the course is always available to you. Now, if in a class of 150, the aim of the lecturer is to put out all the context and the knowledge that he has, that he wants to give you in the best way possible. So the focus is not for him or her to bring you up to speed on every concept, or to particularly make sure that you perform well in your exam as an individual. The focus is that, you know, I have a very complex topic to explain, and I want to do a best job at explaining it such that most of the people, if not all, can understand the topic. So that's the focus in the lecture room. Now, outside of your lecture room, it's completely and entirely up to the student to go out to the library, figure out the concepts that you don't understand, speak to your seniors, speak to your friends, and you know, really try to make sure that you understand and get the concept that the lecturer was trying to give you. They are very open in terms of answering questions. They won't mind explaining the same thing to you over and over and over again until you've understood it. But it's really up to you to not be shy. And like I said before, don't be worried about asking questions. Nothing is stupid. They know, they've seen many students, and they would know exactly how to explain that particular concept to you based on what you're finding it difficult. But it is up to you in the end to make sure that you make that effort and you're proactive enough to reach out to people when you feel like you're not understanding something.
That's great. That's great. So we have someone asking how much programming, like they ask Python, but in general, how much programming do you need to know to do physics at university?
It depends on how theoretical you are as compared to experimental, but I guess I answered it for a PhD student. But to do physics at university as an undergrad, you don't really need to know much computing as well. The computing courses that I took were usually the ones that I opted for, and that was just because I enjoyed doing them. And even if you don't have any computing background, I didn't do computer science at TISB. I did computers before that for my 10th, but I didn't do any for 11th and 12th. But when I went to university, they teach you the course both theoretically and practically. So you have computer labs and you have plenty of time to, you know, sit down with the experts there who can coach you and train you into programming. But it was a difficult course. Not many people took that course. And this is MATLAB and Mathematica. So these are all programming languages that you learn as a physicist because eventually you end up using them regardless of what field you go in. And the courses that you do, and Java as well, and the courses that you do during your undergrad are the courses that you pick because they're always optional, right? They are not, you don't have to do them, but you pick or choose to do them because if they're a prerequisite to another course that you want to do, for example. So yes, that it's important to keep an eye out for what courses you want to do in your second and third and fourth year, because those courses will have some prerequisites. So if you want to do, for example, general relativity in your third year or fourth year in physics, then there will be some math courses that are prerequisite. And if you haven't done those math courses in your second year or first year, then you won't be able to do general relativity in third year. But this is a very specific example, and the department makes you aware of these options and so on at every stage. So you don't need to worry about it, but just be aware that there are prerequisites, and you are always free to choose, and you don't need to go in with any you know, coding experience, so to say.
So that's advice we'll definitely keep in mind. And as a concluding question, for someone who wants to take up aerospace engineering as a major, how can we work on our physics for this during 11th and 12th?
Wow. So since I'm not an aeronautical engineer, I really don't know how to answer that question. But I guess
so. I think a general. I think to make this question broader, what is your advice on working on physics for 11th and 12th, in general, maybe?
Okay, I have a bit of an embarrassing story to share that I probably shared with you earlier, and that is that in my first test at TISB on physics, I failed it. I got 3 on 7, and I was absolutely shattered, you know, because I really enjoyed physics and I didn't understand the whole framework of how IB works and how courses are taught and what you need to know. And I bring that up because, you know, the flow was in my way of learning. So the way I was taught to learn was to be to prepare myself for taking examinations and to pass those examinations. So I was until 10th, I was studying and I was learning and I was mugging things up so that I could reproduce them in the exams and get good grades. And that really didn't work in IB, right? As you guys know. So in IB, then my teachers, Mr. Toke, I'm not sure if he's still in TISB, but he really sat down with me and taught me a new way of learning physics, right? So how do I understand kinetic energy, for example? What does it mean? What does it mean in terms of throwing a ball up and down? And oh my God, trust me, it's a question I still hate solving, because it really plays with your mind. You know, when you're dropping a small and a light and a heavy ball from the 14th floor or whatever, which one will get to the ground first, and what are the forces acting on it, and you know, things like that. These are not easy things, right? These are not, you won't wake up from your sleep and know how to solve these questions unless you really understand the concepts behind it. And I was lucky that my physics teachers at school were patient enough to sit down with me and really made sure that I understood it the way it was supposed to be understood, and not just understanding it so that I could solve a particular problem or answer a question. So I think the only advice I have is you know, understand the concept, understand why a particular question is answered the way it is. And if you don't understand it in the first go, second go, third go, 50th go, keep at it if you really want to learn it. And you know, it really does help to be in one of the best schools in the country, where you have professional help from your teachers and educators who are sitting there spending so much time to make sure that you guys perform well, right? So make use of that resource. Always ask questions, and don't be afraid and don't be shy. The more questions you ask, the more likely you are not to fail to answer that question when it comes up next, right? So you usually have good memory for when you ask a stupid question and you're answered, and you will never ever forget that. If you felt that was a stupid question, that really wasn't, because that really changed the way you think about a particular concept for the rest of your life. So ask questions, and that's, I think for me, that was the best way to learn physics. It's just to keep asking questions when you don't understand things.
So thank you for the great advice. So I think we've reached the end of the session. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we conclude?
No, just good luck to all of you. Thank you for having me here. And I'm on LinkedIn, and I guess you guys also have my email address. So if you have any questions, just write to me. Yeah, that's it.
So absolutely, it was great to have you as well. We learned some very, very valuable things throughout your session. So thank you very much. And thank you to everyone who attended and sent questions. We have a lot of these webinars scheduled over the next 2 to 3 days as well. So make sure you attend. Thank you very much. And we'll be going offline now.
Great, thanks.